3 Banshees gone in the first shot. Oh, this is not looking good. What do we do against this wall of vehicles? They're so tough and hard to kill. How do you deal with this indirect fire? It's just constantly chipping away, eating away at our units, and it kind of makes you feel like you have to just run at the opponent and make sure you get into pressuring them and attacking them as fast as you can, because otherwise you're just going to be losing all your models to this indirect fire. I want to tell you guys that is not the way to approach this. Tough, resilient. This is what the Death Guard are known for. Many Aeldari players are trying to figure out how to handle these high toughness factions with good saves and the ability to put so many units on the battlefield that are difficult to lift. Another problem Aeldari have is dealing with factions that have good indirect. In this battle report, my opponent has both of those things. So if you've been struggling to deal with opponents that have good toughness, good saves, or powerful indirect, then this battle report's for you. I'm really excited to get into this report. I hope it's one that really will help a lot of players understand some of the mentality of how to approach these fights, and I hope it gets you on the path of learning how to defeat these S-tier factions. So let's get into the list. This is my list, and it's the same as what I took in the last battle report. We have Eldrad, Farseer with Torque, Fuegan Lycus, Janezar, Baharoth, Warlock, 5 Corsair Void Reavers, 11 Guardian Defenders, 11 Storm Guardians, 5 Dark Reapers, 5 Fire Dragons, 5 Howling Banshees, 5 Striking Scorpions, 10 Swooping Hawks, 1 Warwalker, 2 sets of 2 Warlock Conclave, 2 sets of 1 Warlock Skyrunners, 5 Warp Spiders with a Blade Array on the Exarch, and 5 Warp Spiders with a Spinneret and Deathweaver on the other. For the Death Guard, my opponent is taking a Lord of Virulence with Tenderless Emissions. That is his only character, and it gives him lone opportunities within 3 inches of a vehicle and some extra bonuses when pointing out targets for the vehicles. He also has 3 Death Shroud Terminators and another set of 3 Death Shroud Terminators, 2 sets of 10 Pox Walkers, a Chaos Predator Destructor, 3 Bloat Drones, 2 Bloat Drones with the Blight Launchers, 3 Blight Haulers, the Mephitic Blight Haulers, and 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. So yes, he took a list that mimics a lot of the lists that we've seen that have been topping some of the tournaments, and is filled with vehicles and units that have good saves and good toughness, especially for their point value. And of course, the 3 Plague Burst Crawlers means some good indirect fire as well. Real quickly, I just wanted to mention my opponent is actually one of my students that I've been coaching. His name is Brian Wong. He's a competitive player. He's actually a candidate for Hong Kong's WTC team. He's had success at GT level events, and he's also been the winner of some local RTTs, and there's just one of the events that he won. He generally plays the Chaos kind of factions, World Eaters, Chaos Marines, and has been getting into the Death Guard as well, but wanted to learn Aeldari. He's kind of grown interest in Aeldari. He's played against them and thought they'd be fun to play, and also felt like they'd be a fun faction to be aggressive with. And also, when he is wanting to play against them, he wants to understand them better so he can play against them as well. But I just wanted to kind of show that this is a opponent that is good, has some good skill, and so we know this is going to be a nice competitive game. Okay, as you see, I did a different kind of format this time. I kind of drew out the battlefield and put things in circles and rectangles to make it a little easier to see everything. I noticed on the tabletop simulator that some things were hidden behind ruins, and a couple things color kind of blended in with the map, and so I thought this might make things easier to see and understand. So if you like this and you feel like this is a much better presentation for these type of battle reports, let me know in the comments, and I will definitely love to get some feedback from people. I made quite a few changes from the last battle report based on comments, so I'm definitely trying my best to listen to some of those good ideas. So please let me know if you have some other good ideas, and if you liked this versus the tabletop simulator battle report. I would love to get feedback on that. I'm also going to be doing more of these battle reports for the people that support me on Patreon. I really appreciate the support that they've given, and I want to do some battle reports exclusively for them as some value back to them for helping support the channel. And so if you want to see more of these battle reports, once I kind of finalize the presentation style here, I'm going to be putting them on my Patreon and eventually also the website that I'm putting together. And so if you like this and want to see more and feel like it's helpful, definitely check that out. And so on the left here, we see that we were playing Linchpin, and we're also on a WTC map. And so we're scoring 3 points for our home objective and then 5 points for every other objective, as long as we also hold our home objective. If we don't hold our home objective, we only score 3 points for the other objectives. And so holding your home objective is very important. This was also the first time I had played on this map, this specific WTC map, but Brian wanted to get some practice on some WTC maps because that's what he's been practicing for. And so that is what we're focused on. And so my Seer Council list is going to be taking the Mortarian's Hammer list. And so if you're not familiar with Mortarian's Hammer, it's a detachment that actually allows my opponent to pick 2 different units to afflict. And that'll be important later on in the match because that gives them a lot of flexibility and power and can make some interesting decisions when picking targets to indirect fire, but also bring in the Death Shroud Terminators. Death Shroud Terminators can deep strike and be just outside of 6 inches to units that are afflicted. And so since that detachment is able to pick 2 units and afflict them, as long as they're more than 12 inches away from his units, which makes this weird little ring basically where some units may not be afflicted because his aura is going to go from 3 inches to 6 inches to 9 inches. And so by turn 3, he's going to have a 9-inch aura around his units that cause the affliction. My opponent picked to have me -1 to hit and also -1 toughness when I am afflicted or in his aura range. So starting off with deployment, let's talk quickly about what the ideas were here, and let's start actually with my opponent. He had 2 units of 3 Death Shroud Terminators in Deep Strike, of course, because of the fact they can come outside of 6 inches of the afflicted units, and he had a Mephitic Blight Hauler also in reserves, probably so that he could keep everything else hidden and not have anything too far back because he does have a lot of vehicles. He has pretty much all of his vehicles behind cover except for one of the Plague Burst Crawlers up here at the top. And this Plague Burst Crawler here is probably trying to bait me to move things into the open to try to get a shot so he can shoot back. The Plague Burst Crawlers have an indirect weapon, but they also have a good amount of firepower when they can see a target and shoot with all their weapons. He placed some Poxwalkers down here on the objective to claim some space and also try to screen out his natural expansion with the Poxwalkers. And he basically hid everything in a way where it was going to be really difficult or impossible for me to get line of sight on anything in turn 1. And so I had to keep that in mind when I was deploying. There was no reason to go super aggressive. I know that I'm going to have to be concerned with screening out the Death Shroud Terminators the best I can because their profile is good into every single unit that I've taken, and in general is just efficient at taking out Eldar units. They're very powerful with their 2-up saves, 4-up invulns, 4 wounds, and their melee is incredible with their sweep attacks. They have a lot of attacks. Even just a 3-man can put out an incredible amount of attacks. With all that in mind, let's take a look at how I deployed. But first, I want you to just take a minute and pause the video if you need and just think about what units I have that are extremely valuable into his list. This will help inform the reasons why I did some of the placements that I did. And I just wanted to give you a moment to kind of think about that a little bit. You can go back to the list page if you need to of the video and see the list and just kind of think about what units I need to prioritize keeping safe and make sure that I get them into the targets at the right time. because that's an important thing to do anytime you start deployment, is to think about which units you have that are most efficient into the things that your opponent has. And you want to make sure that those units are prioritized when it comes to safety, screening, and making sure that you get them as little fire coming in against them as possible, so that you can efficiently deal with the units of your opponent. So I had put Fuegan and the 5 Fire Dragons, Baharoth and the Hawks, and Lycus and her spiders all in reserves or deep strike. And with Seer Council, a lot of times you don't put quite that much in deep strike or reserves, especially Baharoth and the Hawks, because if you go second, you can pick them up and bring them back down to do the Mortal Wound Bomb. And so a lot of times you want him on the board. But the problem is, with indirect fire, you want to be able to control what he's going to be able to attack and not take damage on those vital units. I don't want him shooting Lycus and the Spiders. I don't want him shooting Fuegan and the Fire Dragons, and I definitely don't want him shooting Baharoth and the Hawks. Those 3 units are all very good into his units in general, and some of my most powerful and most efficient units into his. And so I need to make sure that I am careful with them, use them wisely, and get as much value with them as I can. And so in this case, that means putting in the reserves. Now my Farseer Guardian squad is also good into a lot of his units, and so are the Dark Reapers. But the Dark Reapers are pretty inexpensive, relatively speaking, at 95 points. And the Guardian bricks are going to be just fine. If he shoots his Plague Burst Crawlers into that, honestly, it's probably the target I would rather him shoot, or the Storm Guardians, because it's my cheapest models that he's taking off the board. With some of his most expensive models, as Plague Burst Crawlers are 195 points. And so I don't mind him shooting into those, so I'm going to leave those on the board for sure. But between Psychic Shield and kind of keeping things back a little bit, I figured I'd be able to spread the damage out that he's doing with indirect and try to get good use out of all my units. So let's go into the specific unit placement. The Striking Scorpions are in the center to claim some space, as the opponent took some space with his Poxwalkers. The Scorpions are positioned so they can retreat back into the ruin. So they're all going to be able to come back into this ruin, and specifically be 1 inch away from the ruin wall. Mortarian's Hammer has a CP or a stratagem they can use that allows their vehicles to go through ruin walls. And so I don't want him to push forward and charge into my Scorpions through the wall, because there is a little bit of space where he can actually be on the objective. And if he kills a couple Scorpions, all of a sudden he has control of the objective. This way I have flexibility whether I go first or second, that the Scorpions can either be aggressive if I go first or fall back into some safety if I go second. The Dark Reapers are placed right here in black, the DR, and I know it's a little bit fuzzy as the picture quality went down as I transferred it over, but they are here because my opponent placed this Plague Burst Crawler here, as I mentioned, that's kind of out in the open, and I do want them to be able to possibly come out here and get a nice shot on them. Might as well possibly take some shots with him or the Bright Lance. So we have the Bright Lance here that's part of the Guardian squad. Can also possibly pop out and take a shot at the Plague Burst Crawler. And this Bright Lance in particular is very dangerous because we can use it to hit and wound, and then on the damage roll use the Farseer's Branching Fates to make it do 8 damage. Or when we hit, we can use the Farseer to make sure the wound roll goes through, because we only have a 50-50 because Plague Burst Crawlers are toughness 12. And so we can make sure that Bright Lance goes through and make him roll that save. And it does only put the Plague Burst Crawlers on a 4-up because it's AP 3 and the Plague Burst Crawlers have 2-up saves and 5-up invulns, but it only puts them on 4-up. So it's only a 50-50 once we get it through that it is actually going to make him roll a save and fail a save. So it's not exactly guaranteed to do much, but we do want the option to be able to do it. And then of course we can always Psychic Shield because he can't move the Plague Burst Crawler up far enough to be able to shoot at them if we move them, you know, kind of back here. We would obviously measure that out. The warp spiders in the center here in red, they're positioned here because with a flicker jump, they can actually reach every single objective. And I wanted to have them place aggressively so that I had options. And I wanted to make sure I was pressuring every objective and they were able to do it any turn. And I didn't really have to worry about them being attacked by anything. Poxwalkers weren't going to be able to make it. They're pretty slow. And really, it's just the indirect that might do something. But even if he shoots at them with the indirect and kills one or two or whatever it might be of them, they're generally going to survive and they're going to be able to do something on my turn. And so I wanted them pushed up forward. I don't have to worry about any melee threats. And it gives pressure for each objective. So that's why they were put there in the center. The Warlock Skyrunners here are placed back behind the ruin so that they can move onto the objective here, and this one can move around here and get onto this objective. I believe this one down here would have to take a 2-inch extra from the battle focus tokens to be able to reach that objective, but again, I wanted to keep it safe, and then I wanted to make sure that I had the ability to do mission actions just in case my striking scorpions here didn't survive for whatever reason. Like, even though they're going back here, if something happens and he puts all his Plague Burst crawlers into them or whatever it might be and they die, I still have the ability to move my Warlock Skyrunners up to possibly do an action if I feel like it's important enough to score those points. The Corsair Void Reavers are here in purple, and they're basically here to either move forward if I go first, or move this way if I end up not going first, and they will stand here again an inch off this wall to make it really hard for these Poxwalkers to charge them. And again, I have Janezar and the Banshees back here, so if he does charge them and he comes around this wall, we'll be in range to heroically intervene and kill most of them before they can do the damage to the Void Reavers. Now, looking back and being a little bit critical of my own deployment here, one issue with putting Janezar here is that when you think about it, Janezar and the Banshees don't have a lot of good targets in this matchup. They're good into the Deathshroud Terminators, but he's not going to bring them in for a little while. And so really the only target that these Banshees have is his Lord of Virulence that's all the way back here. And so I probably should have put the Banshees more in central over here. So basically put them over here so that I could possibly, if they get shot, I can fade back, but actually move them forward and then do an advance and try to charge into his character. That is something that would have been something to kind of think of because the Banshees are so fast, you know, D6 plus 1 inch movement this way, and then a 16-inch advance, and then a charge that had been a little bit of a charge, but the Banshees are so fast that I think that would have been a better position for her. I was just thinking of keeping these Corsair Void Reavers safe, but I really didn't need to because they have Scout. They really had no reason to be too concerned about the Poxwalkers really getting to them, and so I probably should have put the Banshees over there. Eldrad and the Storm Guardians in orange here. Eldrad is, of course, right here, and his Conclave right next to him. And they're, of course, going to sticky our objective and kind of screen out our deployment zone. And then this right here is the Warwalker. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the Warwalker, so I put him in the back, but he has Scout, so he can either scout this direction. I was also thinking of putting him back in this corner, just to try to get him away from the Plague Burst Crawlers shooting at him. Because with their 2 damage and their high strength, they're wounding him pretty well, and anything that goes through is actually going to do a decent amount of damage, and only 3 things have to go through. It only takes him rolling decent and me rolling a couple bad rolls, and the Warwalker's gone. And so I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with it, but at the end I decided, you know, he's probably going to be shooting other things. But during the deployment stage, I actually set him up here to give me the flexibility because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I did know that I didn't need him up front because I was never going to be pushing him forward and trying to shoot something turn 1, because his whole reason of basically existing is to get AP bonuses to either the Guardian squad here, or Baharoth and the Hawks. And I know Baharoth and the Hawks are not coming down turn 1. They're not allowed because I started them in Deep Strike. And so there's no reason to think about being aggressive with the Warwalker. Putting him in the back here gives me the flexibility, though, to push him forward and then get ready for turn 2 to pop up this direction or pop out this direction to get lines of sight either here, this way, or through here. And all sorts of different sight lines. But basically, by getting him in this positioning here, I can kind of react to what he decides to expose and possibly give the boost to either the Guardians or the Swooping Hawks, depending on the situation. And so he was kind of set there as a flex spot, again, knowing that I'm not going to be aggressive with him. And so that pretty much sums up the deployment. So let's just take a look at the scouting real quick and figure out who goes first. And we see that my opponent won the roll-off. Here you can see that, and he is going to be going first. And so, like I mentioned, our Scorpions are retreating back into this ruin onto the objective. And I knew it was a little bit of a risk to put them on the objective because of the indirect, but nothing else was going to shoot them but the indirect fire. And you have to remember, too, that he can push these forward and even go through the wall and push this forward. And so they will be obviously less than 18 inches away, and there's no psychic shield that I can do. But the math I did ahead of time told me that with their 3-up saves, the Plague Burst Crawlers shouldn't be able to take the Striking Scorpions out very easily at all. Even if all 3 of them shoot, it's unlikely that they kill all 5 models. Also, my Corsair Void Reavers moved forward, and the Warwalker moved up, like I mentioned before. Now, another thing I want to point out is I was actually very careful to make sure I spread my units out. I spread the units out specifically being at least more than 3 inches away. So this is more than 3 inches here. This is more than 3 inches here, here, and here. And the only thing I had that was within 3 inches was this little block here. And the reason is that the Plague Burst Crawlers have an ability that's kind of similar to Mount Ra, if you've used him, where they can roll a dice, and I think it's like on a 6, or maybe it's a 5 if they're afflicted. It's something like that. And they get to do some mortal wounds to the target and anything within 3 inches of that target. And so I didn't want to put anything where he's going to get any kind of free mortal wounds. So you can see that I was very specific and careful to make sure I kept basically everything 3 inches away from every other unit, so he wouldn't get that effectively splash damage. My opponent had no scouting, so with that done, let's take a look at what happened in the first movement phase. My opponent moves up, Plague Burst Crawler moves into the ruin, the other one sets itself up just outside the ruin. This Plague Burst Crawler moves into the ruin. The Blight Hauler is right here, and again, they can go through walls, so he's basically ready to get towards the central objective. He moves Bloat Drone up here and one with the Blight Launcher here, and he had another Mephitic that he moved up slightly. His Predator moved a little bit, and he kept more Blight Drones safe in the back. So he's still very conservative. Going to be very hard to do much damage to him, but he's basically staged himself with some of the Bloat Drones, and he has a lot of options to come out with the Poxwalkers, move up with the Bloat Drone to get lines of sight, Mephitic Blight Hauler towards the center, Predators ready to also attack. And so he's really just staging, of course, at this point and playing careful, which again is a sign of a good competitive player. My opponent drew Sabotage and marked for death. He marked the Scorpions, the Banshees, and the Dark Reapers. When I decided who was going to be marked for death, I chose the 2 Guardian squads because I knew there was no way he was taking those out, and I chose Jane Czar and the Banshees. So Jane Czar and the Banshees were a marked for death target, and also something that he had afflicted. But I wanted to obviously bait that, and my opponent also figured that I was baiting that shot out as well. My opponent picked the Striking Scorpions as his Omega target, or whatever they call it, basically where now on Mark for Death, he gets to pick a target, and if he takes it out, he gets 2 points, but if he takes out one of the ones that I picked, he gets 5 points. Also, he had put this Bloat Drone just on the ruin so that he could score Sabotage, and so that Bloat Drone is going to be doing Sabotage. Now the movement's all done. Let's take a look at the shooting and see what happened as my opponent decided to take his shots. Because what he ended up doing was shooting the Banshees with this Plague Burst Crawler here. And he expected me to Psychic Shield them because they were in range with this Warlock. But I decided to let the first shot go through. And so I was like, okay, indirect. I'm still saving on 4s. Probably won't be too bad. Might lose a Banshee. Maybe worst case, I figure I probably lose 2. That's when my opponent decided to roll a 6 for number of attacks. And so that means it's 9 dice. Not only did he roll a 6 for number of attacks, he hit with 6 of the dice. And so it was looking real bad for me. This was the first shot of the game, and he has 2 more Plague Burst Crawlers yet to shoot. This is the aftermath of the shooting. And here I am like, wow. He shot the Banshees 1 time, took out 3 Banshees. This is all I have left. Janzar, the Exarch, and 1 Banshee. First shot absolutely decimates my Howling Banshees. And of course I Psychic Shielded them after that because I didn't want him to score his Mark for Death. And then he put his other shots into the Striking Scorpions here, trying to get his Omega target because he knew that both of these could shoot. And he wanted to try to get me off the objective and make it so that I would have to put something else up there. But with 2 Plague Burst Crawlers shooting the Striking Scorpions, he actually didn't roll too bad, but the Scorpions have 3-up saves as opposed to the Banshee's 4-ups, and they ended up only losing just 1 model. The Banshees, after they were shot, did do a fade back forward, but I didn't roll very well, so they didn't get very far because, again, my idea was to try to see if I could line up the run into his character. But since they were Psychic Shielded, nothing else was going to be shooting them anyway, so I just moved them forward. And when I measured it out, I realized they weren't going to make it, but I didn't really care because they're so fast. If they were just going here, it didn't matter if I moved them back forward or whatever. I just moved them after they were shot to see if I could end up doing that on my turn, which wasn't the case. But this is the aftermath. He was not able to score Marked for Death. And as you'll see, he ended up being able to score Sabotage, which was unfortunate. But I'm sitting here thinking, what am I going to do? He's already taken out most of my Howling Banshee squad in just 1 shot. How do you deal with this indirect fire? It's just constantly chipping away, eating away at our units, and it kind of makes you feel like you have to just run at the opponent and make sure you get into pressuring them and attacking them as fast as you can, because otherwise you're just going to be losing all your models to this indirect fire. I want to tell you guys that is not the way to approach this. Don't forget that indirect fire is usually really expensive. These Plague Burst Crawlers are 195 points. It's going to take them a lot of turns of shooting to actually get their value if all they're doing is shooting with indirect. Now, if they are able to shoot with all their weapons, it's a different story. They do have a lot more weapons. But with just their indirect fire, as much as it is strong, generally speaking, they're not able to get too much value out of the shooting when that is all that they're shooting is the indirect. And so don't let this little bit of chipping, and this was even much above average that he took out that many Howling Banshees. Don't let this stuff get to you. Don't let it frazzle you. Don't let it make you get panicked or feel like you have to do something that ends up being a bad decision. Because a lot of times, if you get put in a place where you feel like you have to make these risky decisions, that's where you end up making a risky decision that can lose you the game. So just accept the fact that you're going to get hit by some indirect, and there's nothing you can do about that, and focus on making good and smart plays with your units, and focus on the strategy and your overall plan. And that'll help you when dealing with these indirect weapons and the factions that have good indirect. And when my opponent rolled that 6, I was like, oh, no way. That's 9 attacks. That's just absolutely devastating to these Howling Banshees. And he continued to roll well. And I rolled pretty average on my saves, and we lost 3 Howling Banshees. And it's at that stage where it's like, wow, is this even going to be possible with that kind of firepower constantly coming into my units? How do you deal with that? How do you fight back against things that you can't do anything about? So after my opponent's done shooting, we got to start thinking about our own plan. And so our plan is to, of course, hold our natural expansion, which is this objective. And then we have our home objective. And of course, we want to be winning this central objective more than our opponent. And so we're going to create this triangle here of focus. And this is a general strategy that most players go by, is you want to create a triangle effectively of holding your natural expansion well and sieging essentially the center or the other objective that you've decided to be part of your triangle. This one's a bit tough because this central one is pretty out in the open, and it's pretty much impossible to get units on there that are not going to be exposed. So it makes it a pretty tough central objective to win, especially when your opponent has this much firepower ready to point at it at any moment. Okay, so now that we know what the opponent did, because he didn't do any charging, of course, let's just take a look here and see, what do we do now that this has all happened? We have a couple options, and I just want to kind of present them to you and kind of see what you think we should do. I'll go ahead and tell you that we ended up getting a tempting target and cleanse. The opponent picked this as the tempting target, and I didn't want to be forced into trying to take that. So I ended up redrawing, and we ended up getting bring it down. So now we have cleanse and bring it down as our two objectives. So tempting target was gotten rid of for a CP, and we have cleanse and bring it down. So what do you think we should do here? We could either be pretty passive and try to set up for the next turn. Pretty much try to score cleanse, get something on the central objective, cleanse with the scorpions, and then maybe take a shot with our Bright Lance or the Dark Reapers at something, try to bring it down maybe. Or we can go aggressive, move the scorpions forward, possibly either do some move blocking or try to go into his lord, move the Dark Reapers up. There's actually an angle here where we can shoot at the bloat drone. We can move our Bright Lance up and get shots into the Plague Burst Crawler. We can flicker jump our Warp Spiders forward to either get on this objective or shoot into the Poxwalkers. We can run at the Poxwalkers with the Void Reapers. We can advance and charge with Jane Czar into things up here. We could Unshrouded Truth, one of the Guardian bricks, probably the Farseer Guardian brick, and put it on the center so that we have a lot of OC and actually get some good shooting into the Plague Burst Crawlers, because he doesn't have this screened out right now. So those are a couple things to kind of consider. Do we go aggressive or do we play passive? We do have kind of that ticking time bomb of indirect fire constantly shooting at us. Can we afford to play passive when we're getting shot and having things like 3 of our Banshees taken out and just 1 round of shooting? Can we afford to play safe, or do we push forward into the opponent? Well, in the next slide here, I'll show you what I did in my movement phase. So this is turn 2 movement. We decided to play pretty conservatively. We did move the Bright Lance up to take that shot of the Plague Burst Crawler. We moved our Dark Reapers up and actually Unshrouded Truth them to get shots into his bloat drone, because this bloat drone is doing an action. It's doing sabotage still at this point. As you can see by my opponent's score, he did finish it, and unfortunately my Dark Reapers failed at taking out the bloat drone. The crazy thing is that the Exarch actually hit and did 5 damage to the bloat drone, but the other 4 Dark Reapers, unfortunately, even using my token and a CP reroll, ended up only taking the bloat drone down to 2 wounds. Only 1 ended up going through that he didn't save. You might be asking why I used a CP to try to kill the bloat drone, and there's a couple reasons. One, I knew it was really important to get as much firepower into that bloat drone as I could after I saw that the Exarch did 5 wounds. That's an important threshold because the bloat drones have 10 wounds. And so if your Exarch can do at least 4 with a missile launcher, that means it only takes 2 of the other Reaper launchers to finish off the bloat drone, because now you're taking it down to 6 wounds or less. And so it's really big that the Exarch actually hit, wounded, it went through, and he ended up doing 5 damage. So now I know all I need is 2 more Reaper launchers to go through, and I still hadn't used my token, my Aspect Shrine token. Unfortunately, I rolled pretty bad and used Aspect Shrine token to get 3 hits with the Dark Reapers, and then I only wounded him twice, and I used a CP reroll to try to wound him again, because I knew with only 2 wounds it's unlikely, or at least I didn't feel comfortable enough counting on that. And this is such an important kill here, because it not only stops my opponent from scoring a sabotage, but it gets me bring it down. Bring it down is 4 points, sabotage is 3. That's a 7-point change if that bloat drone dies. And so when you have a situation like that, it's worth a CP reroll, even if it's a 66% chance, because I needed that to roll a 3 basically, because I'm strength 10 into his toughness 9. So I had a 66% chance to roll 3 up to give him 3 Reaper launchers to try to save against, which would put him on his 5-ups. And the likelihood of him saving 2 of those is not great. Like on average dice, he only saves 1. And so the other 2 go through and it kills him. So I knew I needed to get that 3rd one in just to try to make sure. And unfortunately, I rolled a 2 into a 2. He took 2 saves, he failed 1, made 1, and the bloat drone ended up on 2 wounds. So just kind of wanted to point that out. That's why I went so aggressive, and why I used a CP and the Aspect Shrine token to try to take out that bloat drone. The Bright Lance hit, and I used the Farseer to force the wound into the Plague Burst Crawler, which he saved on a 4-up. And that was basically my shooting, because I didn't expose anything else. We moved Janezar up to be prepared to do some kind of attack, whether it was in the center or on his expansion. Eldrad is back here screening, and we're still screening, and the Warp Spiders are ready to go. So we really didn't move much else. Our Striking Scorpions are sitting an inch off the wall up here. Again, they're cleansing. We moved the Void Reapers up to cleanse. He tried to do an Overwatch with his Predator right through here. And the thing with Death Guard is that a lot of their weapons have lethal hits. And so he figured with the amount of lethal hits that he had at least a chance of killing enough of these Corsair Void Scarred that it might be hard for me to get on the point to score cleanse. So he went ahead and took the Overwatch here. And I think it was just at like 24 or just below 24 inches, whatever. It was pretty close, but he was just able to make it. And so I had lost 1 Corsair Void Reaver, so it wasn't too bad. And so that was basically my turn, because I knew I wasn't going to be charging anything, and we were just cleansing, and we were really trying to take out this bloat drone, but unfortunately it lived with 2 wounds, and so that was my first turn. We played conservatively, and we were ready for round 2. And just as a recap, and showing the end of my shooting, I did not pick up anything. Bloat drone lived, Plague Burst Crawler took no damage. So far we have a Plague Burst Crawler killing most of the Banshees in the Banshee squad. One of the Striking Scorpions, he's killed one of my Void Reavers, and he still has multiple rounds of these Plague Burst Crawlers shooting at me yet to go. It's looking pretty rough. We've done effectively nothing to him. We did some damage to 1 bloat drone, but my opponent's deadliest things aren't even on the board yet, those Death Shroud Terminators, and he has so many tough targets, it just can seem overwhelming at this point in the game. But let me give you a little bit of confidence, stay positive, and just focus on what you can do each turn to score, and what you can do each turn to make it hard for your opponent to score. That is the things you need to stay focused on. Don't focus on the negatives. Don't focus on all the things he might be able to do and all the things that might happen if his indirect really pops off and takes out a lot of things. You just got to focus with your resources, what you have, and try to figure out what you can do with them to the best of your ability. And as long as you stay focused on that and don't think as much about those other things, it's going to help you find the plays you need to make things work for you and stay focused on winning the game. So turn 3, my opponent had Call the Horde, and I believe it was Overwhelming Force. Call the Horde he can do now with the new cards, either on Eldrad Brick or the Guardian Brick, and so he went through the Ruin Wall with a Plague Burst Crawler to get all the shooting into that Guardian squad, so now it can shoot every single one of its weapons because it has line of sight, and I'm not outside of 18 inches. He moved his Predator up to be able to get line of sight on the Corsairs. He moved the Bloat Drone that was on 2 wounds back. He kind of shifted the Poxwalkers to make sure they were an inch off the wall pretty much everywhere. Also keeping the Blight Launcher drone on the objective, just in case I took out all of those. He also kind of set himself up here to be able to get shots, and just so you know, these Plague Burst Crawler's mortars actually stick up just enough. He was able to get lines of sight like through here and through here, and so I had to be careful with what I put out in these lines, and also Overwatch, because their Overwatch is still kind of nasty with the amount of shooting they have and the lethal hits that Death Guard has basically everywhere. So my opponent probably figured he wasn't going to get Call the Horde, but he at least would try to shoot this squad as much as he could. And if he got lucky and just kind of ripped through all the Guardians and the Bright Lance, that's really all he's got to do to score that. He was going to give it a shot. Overwhelming Force, of course, he's just got to take out the Void Reapers, and then I have Dark Reapers on the objective, and I have Striking Scorpions on the objective as well. And so he has some targets that he can also try to focus on taking out to score his secondaries. So let's take a look at how his shooting went. So this is after the shooting phase. He easily picked up the Void Reapers. He killed 2 of my Dark Reapers, and he did only about 3 models were picked up of my Guardian Brick here. It was actually kind of a mid to bad roll on his part, and I made some saves, and I only lost 3 Guardians here, and then we did the free fade back this direction. And so that was really it. My opponent shot his Plague Burst Crawlers. I think he is actually the reason why that some of the Dark Reapers died was the Plague Burst Crawlers, and 1 shot the Guardian Bricks, and I think the other 2 shot the Dark Reapers, and between the 2 of them, they only killed 2 Dark Reapers. And so it really wasn't that bad at all. And so that's all my opponent was able to take out, basically. Corsair, Void Reapers, a couple Dark Reapers, and then several Guardians. And that was basically it. But he still has some line of sight here. It's hard to tell on this graphic, but there was a little bit of line of sight. I couldn't quite get everything out of line of sight by moving this direction, but it ended up being okay because I wasn't too worried about Overwatch into this squad in particular with a -1 to wound. Another thing to mention is the Farseer is now within 12 inches of the Plague Burst Crawler, so if he does try to Overwatch or use any kind of stratagem, he's going to have to pay an extra CP for it, and that's why I love the Torque, because it kind of forces your opponent to really think, do I want to do the Overwatch, or is it worth it? And so it's a really nice enhancement to cause problems for your opponent. And so at the end of my opponent's turn, he didn't do any charging. He scored 3 points for Overwhelming Force by taking out the Void Reapers, and he scored nothing on Call the Horde, of course. He scored his 8 points primary by holding his home objective, which is back here, of course, and then, of course, holding this one here. So he got 3 points for his home objective and 5 for the one in No Man's Land, and that is all he scored. And so now, before we go into my movement phase, let's just pretend we're in our command phase right now. Okay, you're in your command phase. This is the situation. You're the Aeldari player. You know what you have in reserves. You've got Lycus, Baharoth, and Fuegan in reserves. Your opponent's played pretty conservatively. A lot of things are still hidden. A couple things came out to shoot. You know, his Predator came out to shoot. His Plague Burst Crawler went aggressive, or at least one of them. What do you do in this situation? The cards that you drew, or I drew, were Area Denial and Assassination. What would you do in this situation? I just want you to, again, even pause the video. I really think it's valuable to look at these situations and kind of put yourself in the shoes of the person playing and just think about what you would do. Are we going to play conservatively again? Do we need to rush? Plague Burst Crawlers haven't done that much. If you think about it, they've killed a couple Dark Reapers, Striking Scorpion, several Banshees, and some guardians. But when you think about the point value that the Plague Burst Crawlers have taken out altogether over 2 rounds, it's really not that much. I mean, it's still chipping away at our units, but compared to the nearly 600 points that those things are, it's like 585 points. And you compare that to how much they've actually done in 2 rounds of shooting, it really isn't that bad. And again, we just need to remember that the indirect weapons generally have to be shooting throughout the whole game before they start to take out enough to equal their value. And that's kind of how GW has balanced indirect. And so generally, you don't have to just full in rush against your opponent. So do we need to go into our opponent and shoot as much as we can here? Can we be aggressive? Or do we play safe and focus on our secondaries? I mean, area denial, he's got nothing in the center, so that's an easy secondary for us. We have lots of things that can go there. We have, again, the Warlock Skyrunner. We have the Warp Spiders that can go there. We even have Jane Czar and the Howling Banshees. Definitely kind of an expensive unit, but can also go there if we feel like we needed to. We could even Unshrouded Truth something into the center. So we have lots of options, and we can try to just score our points, or we can try to figure out how to be aggressive. And so I hope I've given you enough time to kind of consider the options, and we'll go ahead and take a look at what I did. So what I did is I got rid of Assassination, because the only thing we can try to assassinate is his Lord, who's got Lone Op, and he's basically screened out because he's got units on this side, he's got units on this side, and he's got a unit here. So it's almost impossible for us to get anything within 12 inches of his Lord, even with Unshrouded Truth. I did measure it out, and I could get like 2 Swooping Hawks, or like Baharoth and 1 Hawk, and they were not going to be able to even throw grenades. I think I could get them at like 8.5 inches away, basically, or something along those lines. And it was going to do almost nothing. Or maybe it was just over 9 inches away, but either way, we weren't going to be killing his Lord. So we got rid of Assassination, and we got Overwhelming Force. Now we have Overwhelming Force and Area Denial. This is where I decided to get aggressive. I decided this was the turn. And sometimes you can look at your secondaries to help you make that decision. I have no secondaries that require action, so I can go ahead and attack with everything, and I don't have to worry about doing any action. So that's one thing to consider and to think about when you're deciding on the turn to go aggressive. We have Overwhelming Force, which means if we kill things, that's how we score. Area Denial we're basically going to get for free, so we don't have to really worry about that. We can just send our little Warlock Skyrunner right here, as I did, to get Area Denial, and boom, 5 points. Super nice, super easy. So Overwhelming Force is the one that we got to figure out. And the only options we have are these Poxwalkers, and we have this Bloat Drone. And of course we have his Poxwalkers that are back here, which I think had actually moved out a little bit to kind of screen his back. And then we have these Bloat Drones here, which are going to be extremely difficult targets to take out. So when we consider the targets we can take out to score, we have Poxwalkers and this Blight Launcher Bloat Drone. And so those are the targets I decided to focus on to score the points. We did a lot here, and we brought everything onto the table. And this turn is probably the one that I'll spend a little bit more time on compared to any other turn, because this was very specific placement, and this was also kind of a game-defining turn. This was the go turn, and it did end up being turn 2. I was prepared to wait until turn 3, but with everything, the way everything was set up, and I calculated everything out and measured everything out, I realized that this turn would be a good turn to basically go all in. So our Striking Scorpions are here as backup, but also, of course, to stay on the point. We brought in Fuegan and the Fire Dragons right here, and they all could see just a bit of this Plague Burst Crawler. Fuegan and the Exarch, of course, are within Melter range. The Farseer is in range to apply +1 to hit, so we have the +1 to hit. And so I'm comfortable with this Plague Burst Crawler being taken out between the Farseer and the Warlocks and the Fire Dragons and everything with a +1 to hit. I felt, okay, that Plague Burst Crawler, we should be good. I have the Aspect tokens that I can use on Fuegan, and so we should be good dealing with the Plagueburst Crawler. So I put the Brightlands here to take a shot, and this line is kind of weird, but there was actually a shot into the Predator, and I think what I did is I made these rectangles just a little too big. I think about this much is supposed to be cut off of both of them, but I tried to draw it as to scale as I could, but could only do so well with the program. But there was this line, and the Dark Reapers and the Bright Lancer were all in line to shoot the Predator, and so I had that line of sight. And so because I felt comfortable with the Fire Dragons focusing on the Plagueburst Crawler, I wanted to have the Dark Reapers also line up shots. And I just realized, so for my secondaries I had Bring It Down. I had kept, so we still have Bring It Down, and then we got Assassination that we got rid of, and we went to Area Denial. And so now all I have to do is take out a vehicle and have the Warlock Skyrunner on the objective. And so since my secondaries aren't any actions, and all I have to do is kill a vehicle, which I have lots of different vehicles to choose from, and the Warlock Skyrunner can be there, it's really nice because it gives me the flexibility to put my full force into the opponent. So now that this Plagueburst Crawler we pretty much are going to take out, and we know that we can, what else can we do to be aggressive? So we have that Plagueburst Crawler, we have a lot of firepower going on the Predator, which Predator actually isn't too hard to take out. The Brightlands and the Dark Reapers have a decent chance of actually dealing with this Predator, with the branching fate of the Farseer going into the Brightlands. And so I felt like I would either kill or at least be very close to destroying the Predator with the Dark Reapers and the Brightlands, because they have 3-up saves, and this is one of the vehicles that doesn't have an invuln. And so I felt pretty comfortable dealing with the Predator. We did move our Warp Spiders up here because right in here they were actually able to fit and move their 26 inches with the focus token, and I wanted them to shoot everything into these Poxwalkers. So why do you think this was a play I decided on? And you can think about that play for a second as I talk about some of the others. I brought Janezar and the Banshees this direction to get some extra shooting into the Poxwalkers if needed, and then charge this Bloat Drone back here. I only had 2 wounds, and I knew Janezar and the Banshees would easily take that out. And I actually thought this Blight Launcher drone also was the one that had the fall back and shoot, but it actually doesn't. I had already charged, you'll see I charge into this Bloat Drone, and just the reason I charged the Bloat Drone and not both is because I didn't know that. Because ideally I would have sent Janezar into this Bloat Drone just to make sure it died, and the other 2 Banshees into the Blight Launcher one to try to chip off some wounds off of it, and also tie it up so that it couldn't shoot its weapon, because it does have a blast weapon, so it's not shooting in melee. But we ended up going into this one, and that is the reason why I just wanted to put that forward when you see that happen in the future. We dropped Lycus and the Spiders here, and this was purely for screening. We still have to worry about those Terminators coming in from Deep Strike. And so what we did is we made sure, even at 6 inches, there's nothing 6 inches getting in basically anywhere in my deployment zone. And so we made sure that pretty much from any unit, he's just not getting his Deathshroud Terminators in anywhere meaningful. We even have this Warlock Skyrunner even is applying an aura. Now the interesting thing about those Deathshroud Terminators is they can come down and Deep Strike outside of 6 inches from afflicted targets, but not any target. So for example, if he afflicted the Warwalker and the Dark Reapers, he still has to be 9 inches away from the Hawks. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that he can just Deep Strike anywhere he wants, because this may push him out further. And so with this setup, I felt pretty confident. We moved, our Guardians back here to screen out the back, the Warlock Skyrunner to screen this, and again, just make sure that he had no good place to really bring the Deathshroud Terminators in. And I made sure that Lycus and the Warp Spiders, between them, there was going to be, Lycus was going to have 9 inches from her and then 9 inches from these warp spiders was going to close that in. And even if he did afflict one of them, then he would have to afflict both to basically to try to get in against Lycus. But Lycus here is not actually coming down to shoot or do any damage right now. But what she is set up for is this distance here is actually a distance that she can make, get some shooting in and do some charging. And I wanted to pressure my opponent because he was going to know that that is something that could happen and that he had to be concerned about these warp spiders attacking his home objective. Eldari and the Storm Guardians unfortunately don't really have much to do, and we already moved pretty much everything else. Now the Hawks, this shows the Hawks actually after. This is the one time I did do the little, I brought Baharoth down here, and they were within 9 inches of the Warlock Skyrunner. I did the Mortal Wounds into the Plagueburst Crawler, and then I Unshrouded Truth them back to safety back here. I want to point out something with the Hawks because this is a very important placement, and a lot of people talk about how hard it is to keep the Swooping Hawks alive. But what you can see what I did is I have the Skyrunner here, we have the Warwalker here, we have the Dark Reapers here. I basically surrounded the Hawks so there's not really any good way for my opponent to bring anything in range or deep strike anything very easily to where they can get in range to do damage to these Swooping Hawks. Now, he can, of course, try to shoot Plagueburst Crawlers at him, but I have Psychic Shield. And so I have a good way of keeping these Hawks safe from not only the Deep Strike, because I've screened it out with other units, but also from the indirect fire. And so I know these Hawks are generally going to be pretty safe. So the Hawks did Mortal Wounds to this Crawler, which generally, I think it's about an 85-ish% of the time you can expect at least 4 mortal wounds from the 10 Hawks. I only did 3, which is unfortunate, but again, it's a dice game. Sometimes you get bad dice, but you have to keep playing with the best that you can with the resources you have. We moved the Hawks back, and I figured, hey, maybe the dice will come back for me later. Even though we had some bad dice so far, maybe they'll start showing up for us later in the game. And so we're set up here to take shots on the Plagueburst Crawler, and the Warwalker, of course, is here to take shots on the Plagueburst Crawler as well, because we want that AP, and we know we're going to be doing Fate Inescapable on these Hawks, so they get Ignores Cover. They're going to get extra AP on their critical wounds, and the Warwalker is going to give them extra AP again. So they're basically going to start at AP1 Ignores Cover, possibly going to AP2 on some of their shots, and then Baharoth will also be sitting at AP2 Ignores Cover, and the Exarch will actually be AP3 Ignores Cover. So we're going to be putting the Plagueburst Crawler on its invuln save with the Exarch. And so we're sitting pretty nice because we did 3 mortal wounds, which at least helps chip it down. We might do some damage to the Warwalker, and then the Hawks should finish off that Plagueburst Crawler. And so we have Fuegan and the Fire Dragons dealing with this one, and we have the Hawks dealing with this one. That's a plan. And we have the Bright Lance Dark Reapers dealing with the Predator. That's the plan there. Jane Zar here, Warp Spiders and Jane Zar into the Poxwalkers. So that's basically our aggressive play. And we're going to try to do as much as we can to just absolutely own this side of the board and make it so that our opponent has to try to move up with some other resources. And also do significant damage on this side of the board to where when he hits back, it's just not going to hurt us as much as what we did to him. And he's going to have a lot of catching up to do to be even close to dealing as much damage to us as what we did in this turn. So now that we've gone over all that, again, this was the big turn. This was the aggressive one. Let's see what happened by the end of my shooting phase, what we were able to do. Before we move on, I think we've had plenty of time to kind of think about these Warp Spiders. So the Warp Spiders were flicker jumped here because I was confident that Jane Zar and the Warp Spiders were going to erase these Poxwalkers. So that means he's only got a few OC from this bloat drone on the objective. That means that my opponent only scores on his home objective, which is 3 points. So my Warp Spiders have basically taken out 60 points of my opponent, kind of blocked my opponent from being able to move kind of through here possibly if he wanted to, and also took out 5 points from my opponent. So I got incredible value with these Warp Spiders from this play. Those 95 points are being put to very good use, and it's something that even if my opponent kills them right away, they've still gotten their value. But the thing with warp spiders is they still have 3-up saves and 5-up invulns, so they're not exactly something that's just easy to take out. And they also have good overwatch. Now, unfortunately, overwatching these vehicles is probably not going to do anything. And that's another reason that I did this play. When you think about what those warp spiders are capable of doing in this matchup, they're not really going to kill anything. Even his Lord has basically got Terminator armor and a whole bunch of wounds. They're not going to kill his Lord of Virulence. Basically, all they can kill are these Poxwalkers. That's really about the only thing they can actually do good damage into. And so by jumping them here, getting the best value that they can get from my opponent's army, which is the Poxwalkers, and then denying my opponent 5 points is literally the best value that I could get out of these warp spiders, basically. They're also helping me screen out the Deathshroud Terminators because I want to try to keep this area safe from Deathshroud Terminators and of course all the way back through here. So by having them push forward, and then we of course have Jane Czar as well, pushing and screening out more area to make it hard for my opponent to be able to bring in those Deathshroud Terminators because we have the Skyrunner here as well. So we have a lot of things that are screening at the same time doing multiple other things. And that's where you really have to look for these plays to get good value out of your units. Anytime you can use a unit for multiple things at the same time, this is where you're going to really make it hard for your opponent to keep up. So with all that in consideration, let's just take a look at what happened by the end of my shooting phase, what we were able to do. Boom. Look at that. We took out Plagueburst Crawler, Predator, Poxwalkers, all in our shooting. Everything basically went to plan. It was kind of wild, actually. The Farseer and Warlocks did a bunch of damage to this Plagueburst Crawler, like way more than average. And it was a good thing too, because all the Fire Dragons shot into it, and they actually bounced really badly. And I actually had to use an aspect token on my last Fire Dragon to make sure I push an extra wound through and force him to take another 5-up save just to make sure that this Plagueburst Crawler died, because I rolled so bad with my Fire Dragons and he was able to save against the Exarch. And so it was actually really tight, and it was really good that the Farseer and Warlocks actually got all their damage in, because otherwise that Plagueburst Crawler would have survived Foigan and the Fire Dragons, just because I rolled really bad. And so I wanted to, again, make sure I had extra firepower here, and you do need to do this like pretty much every time, especially on an important turn like this. I don't want Foigan and the Fire Dragons to be able to be shot. And so if this Plagueburst Crawler doesn't die, it's really bad, because he's going to be able to get attacks, and a lot of attacks, into these Fire Dragons. If I take out this Plagueburst Crawler, these Striking Scorpions basically make it so that he's completely safe. The opponent can't bring Deathshroud Terminators in close enough to actually charge or get into the Fire Dragons, and the Guardians also have everything screened out. So the Fire Dragons will be safe if I can take out this Plagueburst Crawler. And so you want to get as much extra firepower as you can just to make sure that happens when it's so important that you take out that target. I was even willing to run the Striking Scorpions into the Plagueburst Crawler if needed to do an extra wound that we could push through with the aspect token on the Exarch, because it's got AP 3, so it's going to put him on his invuln save. And that was going to be a last resort, because I didn't want to come off this point. But if I had to do just one wound to him, I would even do that, just because it was so important that we took this out and we kept our Fire Dragon safe. And so you got to keep those things in mind. Again, Fire Dragons, high priority. We need to keep him alive to be able to keep chewing through our opponent's units. Same thing in a sense with Balroth and the Hawks. They are actually going to do a bunch of damage along with the Warwalker into a lot of these units. And we have to be really focused on keeping these high priority units safe. Consider when thinking about your high priority units, it's not only just that they're high priority, but what specifically is their priority. Foigan and the Fire Dragons are one of the best things into units that have 2-up saves. So he has another Plagueburst Crawler that's got 2-up saves, and that is the other target that I really want to get my Fire Dragons into. Balroth and the Hawks are going to be good against most everything. They're actually going to struggle a little more into the Plagueburst Crawlers, so if I can get them shooting other things outside the Plagueburst Crawler, that's great. Especially with the help of the Warwalker, they're going to shred pretty much any unit that my opponent has with the help of the Warwalker. And so I want to use them in tandem, use them as a combination, try to keep them safe, try to keep the Fire Dragon safe, and then of course get as much value as I can with the other units. Lycus also needs to be safe because Lycus is going to allow me to attack, is going to combo well with the Hawks, can shoot first to get the Hawks lethal hits on 5-ups, and is actually pretty good at taking out some of these like bloat drones. I probably wouldn't charge the melee bloat drones, but the ones that just have some shooting. If you shoot the bloat drones and charge and fight them, you actually have pretty good chances of actually taking them out because Lycus is actually that powerful. Along with her Exarch buddy, the 20 attacks that they put in on the fight phase, along with the already decent shooting that she puts out, is actually pretty strong. And the lethal hits on 5-ups makes both of their attacks pretty scary for your opponent. And so she's actually pretty good into these like bloat drone, blight launcher, mephitic blight hauler. They actually can do really good damage, and even better than Jane's are because of the lethal hits. And so that's why this was a priority unit. And she's sitting back here trying to be as safe as she can so that I can also attack into this area with her if need be, because she's actually an effective unit into those targets. So of course we're easily able to score Bring It Down, and we're able to score Area Denial. So our secondaries were good. So let's just take a quick look at our charge phase. We charge Jane's R into the bloat drone. Again, I think I would have charged into the blight launcher as well, because it would have been an easy charge and I could have gotten some wounds in it. But we charge on the bloat drone, we do the fight. Fight happens, we kill that, and then we consolidate into the blight launcher, which now will not be able to shoot on the next turn because it does not have a fallback and shoot. So we scored 8 points for holding our home objective and holding our natural expansion. And in this turn, we accomplished a lot. We killed a lot. We got our opponent off their natural expansion. And so they're only going to score 3 on their turn. But if you look at the score right now, we have scored 14 in secondaries and then 8 on primary, putting us at 22. And our opponent has scored 8 on primary and only 6 in secondary. So they are only at 14. So that means our opponent's going to get a challenger card. That's something to keep in mind, and know that when you take a lead like this, that your opponent's going to start getting challenger cards. Let's take a look at what our opponent did in his next turn in the movement phase. Before he finished moving, I just wanted to point out I did do an overwatch here. Between the overwatch of the Hawks and the Aegis Fury with the Skyrunner, the bloat drone actually got taken out. That was actually a pretty big play. Wasn't something that I wanted to count on, but because all the Hawks have lethal hits, and Aegis Fury had already done 4 or 5 mortal wounds, I don't remember off the top of my head, but cut it almost in half, I figured that the Hawks had a semi-decent chance of taking it out, and I still had 1 or 2 aspect tokens. I don't remember off the top of my head. I know I had at least 1. I may have even had 2. And I figured with aspect tokens, I could take out another resource of my opponent, another 90 points, just taken off the board with 1 CP, because the Hawk's Overwatch is actually pretty scary. So this is the end of my opponent's movement. So he was able to deep strike the Death Shroud here and here. Guess who made a mistake? My opponent afflicted Lycus and the spiders, and he also afflicted the Skyrunner. So he could bring the Death Shroud here, and this was just 6 inches, and he could make this charge, get onto the central objective, take me off of it, and be on the central objective with some hard to kill Terminators. And he was able to get these Terminators here because I made a mistake. What was this mistake that I made? Well, I wasn't thinking about the fact that these Warp Spiders are afflicted. So they do not cast a 9-inch range that he has to stay out of. It's only 6-inch, and the opponent was able to, with 6 inches, put the Death Shroud right here. It was like a perfect little rectangle for him. It was 6 inches from the Skyrunner, 6 inches from Warp Spider, 6 inches from Lycus, and he was able to sit it right there. And I was being aggressive with Lycus, wanting them to get that extra inch to move towards my opponent's objective, and so they were right against the wall, which means that he has an easy charge into the spiders. So I knew that that was a mistake, and again, we are going to make mistakes. Sometimes you're going to be playing, and I was so into trying to make sure I made all the movements of that turn, that last turn, that they were good movements and they were things that were going to work and screen out my opponent and do our damage, that I missed this right here. And that's going to happen. And it doesn't matter in a sense how good you are. There's going to be pieces of information that sometimes just slip your mind, and there's going to be little mistakes made. But you can't get too hard on yourself. Again, you got to focus on your resources, what you do have, and think about what you can do in response to your mistakes so that you can have the best chance of winning the game. So now that my opponent made his move, let's take a look and see how his shooting went. So my opponent was able to finish off the Dark Reapers. He's able to take out most of the Warp Spiders. The Howling Banshees are all killed except for Jane Czar, who faded back here to make it so that she would actually survive and make this charge kind of difficult. More indirect fire was put in the Striking Scorpions. My opponent was trying to fire on the Striking Scorpions on the chance that he could actually take them out, and then I would not be on this objective. So he was kind of trying to do the same thing that I did to him, where he was going to try to deny me this 5 points. And so you got to be careful about just leaving a unit, especially when there was only 4 of them. Is it likely that he actually takes out 4 with 3 up saves? Absolutely not. But dice can be bad sometimes, and we have to be careful about putting, small amounts of OC and small amounts of models on objectives when our opponent has indirect, like Plague Burst Crawlers. But his plan is to actually charge this Skyrunner, so he didn't shoot it, and he saved a CP to make sure he could reroll the charge into the Skyrunner, because that was actually, in his mind, the most important charge, because he had to get me off this objective. He couldn't let me score 5 points here. He had enough OC to control here because these have so much OC, it's kind of crazy. And I only had the 2 Warp Spiders. So he was able to do a bit of damage, and you can see he also brought the Blight Hauler down here out of reserves and took shots at the Fire Dragons. He killed the one that was in cover here, and that's actually all it did. So we still have 3 of the 5 Fire Dragons. Sorry, he must have killed 2 of them. And so we still have 3 of the 5 Fire Dragons and Fuegan doing just fine. And so they're still very effective into most everything the opponent has. So we're still doing good there. The Hawks weren't touched. We Psychic Shielded them, so he couldn't shoot them. I think he did try with a Plague Burst Crawler going into them. Psychic Shield, that means nothing's shooting them. And the Terminators here actually weren't in range to shoot anything or couldn't see anything except for the Skyrunner, which he couldn't shoot because he needed to come and charge in to get on that point. And so that's basically where we're sitting at the end of our opponent's shooting phase. Now the opponent is trying to score Assassination, so he really needs Jane Czar to die. So he charges Jane Czar, try to finish her off. She had taken a bit of wounds from the shooting that went through after the Banshees died. The opponent's also going to do recover assets. So he's got the Mephitic Blight Hauler that was moved here just in No Man's Land, and then he's got his Poxwalkers back here so that he can score his recover assets. And so that's why his movement was what it was. He made the charge into the Skyrunner, and he made the charge into Lycus. Then he also double charged the Warp Spiders to try to get his drones in cover and finish them off. So our mistake is coming to haunt us, and we have 3 Death Shroud that are going to be fighting into Lycus and the Spiders, and they do a lot of damage. So what can we do in this situation? Well, we have Forewarned. So we're going to use it because we're in range of a Psyker right here, and we're going to see what Forewarned can do for us in trying to survive the incredible sweep attacks that the Death Shroud Terminators have. And remember, we're in Affliction range, so we are -1 toughness, which means we are toughness 2. So the sweep attacks are still wounding us on 2s. This means that Forewarned is going to do great for us because it's going to put him to where he's wounding us on 3s, and we're also going to be -1 to hit. So that's going to change the math dramatically on how much damage his Death Shroud Terminators are going to be able to do into the Warp Spiders. So with that in mind, let's see what happens during the fight phase. Well, we lost 3 of the Spiders, but our Exarch lived, Lycus lived, and we actually killed 1 and I think a half of the Death Shroud Terminators. I think we actually killed 1 and put 1 on 2 wounds, 1 or 2 wounds actually. And this unit hits so hard. Lycus and the Warp Spiders is such an amazing unit. Even getting charged by a very deadly unit, Forewarned was basically the contributing factor that allowed this to happen, because if I didn't have Forewarned, in all likelihood, the spiders are completely dead, and Lycus would possibly have survived, but would have been seriously hurt and wouldn't have done nearly as much damage by herself back to the Death Shroud, because the Exarch actually does great amount of damage with his lethal hits and his twin linked. He actually does pretty well. And so it was very vital that we use Forewarned here to try to keep our spiders as healthy as possible, and it worked out great in this situation. We did lose the spiders, but Jane Czar held out. She actually didn't really take much in the way of wounds. She might have taken like 2. I think she was down to like 2 wounds after that fight, and she fought back and did just as much wounds back into the Blight Hauler. Not great into these vehicles, but usually she's going to be doing 2 or 4 damage into them, so not too bad. Of course, the Death Shroud Terminators just absolutely pick up our Warlock Skyrunner. That was expected, and that was the end of my opponent's charge and fight. So he was not able to kill Jane Czar. He was not able to kill Lycus. That means he did not score Assassination. And one thing that I think a lot of people underestimate is actually the durability of our Phoenix Lords. We have so many things that are so fragile. The Phoenix Lords have just enough extra durability that sometimes it catches people off guard. And Jane Czar definitely did that with the 2-up, 4-up, and the amount of wounds that she has. Sometimes they just live, and it's great when they do. I love the Phoenix Lords. They make the army feel so good. They make their units so much better, and they sometimes cause our opponents to just not be ready for their durability to a certain extent. They are still fragile, don't get me wrong. They can still be taken out, especially with certain weapons, but a lot of times the saves that they have actually help them stay alive. And in this case, the Jane Czar did, and so we denied our opponent Assassination. So let's take a look at our next turn, which is turn 3 for us, round 3, but it's going to be turn 6 because he went first, so he's going to be on all the odd turns. I went second, so I'm going to be all the even turns. So let's take a look at our movement phase. So we got overwhelming force and no prisoners, which is great because no prisoners means we just got to kill stuff, and overwhelming force, we're just going to take things that are off objectives. And he's got Terminators, he's got drones, he's got all sorts of things on objectives, Poxwalkers. So this was another big turn because we haven't won yet. Like we've established a lead, but we haven't won the game yet. And so we got to really make sure we're paying attention, and we are going to try to focus on closing the game out. We do have a lead and we have a substantial resource lead, but this game can still be lost with bad play, and so we need to keep playing well. So we moved our Guardians up to be able to get shots into the Death Shroud Terminators. We have our Bright Lance looking at the Plague Burst Crawler, but also the Bloat Drone over here. We have Fuegan, who is over here, and basically these Fire Dragons are in range, and he is in Melta range of the Plague Burst Crawler, and then this Exarch is actually looking at the Mephitic Blight Hauler. And so I felt confident that between these 3 dragons and some of the other shooting we had, that we would be able to take out the Plague Burst Crawler, that I didn't need the Exarch. Lycus and the Spiders warp and fall back, basically. I'm sorry, they don't warp back, they fall back. But they still have 12 inches, so they're able to make it behind this little crate here. Eldrad moves up with the Warlocks and 2 Fusion Gunners and looks at this Death Shroud Terminator to try to finish off that unit. He's able to apply +1 to wound. The Farseer is able to apply +1 to hit. And we still have Jane Czar back here dealing with this Blight Hauler. So we bring down Baharoth and the Hawks. And Baharoth and pretty much all the Hawks are going to be shooting these Poxwalkers because that's going to do another really terrible thing for our opponent, which is when we wipe off these Poxwalkers, now he doesn't have his home objective, which means on his turn, when he scores this objective, instead of getting 5, he's only going to get 3. So this is a very powerful thing to do. Now, the other thing I want to note is that it is now turn 3. We don't have to worry about Deep Strike anymore. His Death Shroud Terminators have already come down. They had to because it was turn 3. So we can just move out, move forward. We don't have to worry about screening our deployment zone at all. He doesn't have any way of picking things back up and putting them back down somewhere else. So now it's time to move forward and try to close the game out. We don't have to be conservative at all anymore. And this is where Eldrad is really going to start to turn on, is usually turn 3. If you went second, and sometimes not till turn 4 if you went first. But because we don't have to worry about screening anymore, we move forward, and we're going to continue to move forward with our Storm Guardians, and everything's basically going to be trying to get max value here. We did do our Mortal Wounds to the Blight Hauler to try to see if we could save Jane Czar, and I think they did a pretty good amount of wounds, like 4 or 5-ish. And so this Blight Hauler is getting pretty low on wounds, and they're going to shoot and take out these Poxwalkers. Now, they're not going to be as safe here as they were in other places, but that's okay because this is such an important thing to do, and it gets so much value because not only are we scoring our own secondaries, which overwhelming force because we take that out, but we're also giving some mortal wounds out to a target that might help keep one of our other units alive, which again, if we more resources we have, the better. So that's going to help us in the long run. So this is pretty much kind of how we're focused on moving everything and why we moved it. The Striking Scorpions moved up here to basically go into this Blight Hauler to see if they could finish it off after the Exarch shot it. It's at full wounds, and I figured if the Exarch shot it and it was in Melta range, basically we were probably going to take it down to somewhere around like only 4 wounds left, and the Striking Scorpions could charge it and fight it, maybe do a wound or 2 at most, but it would at least tie it up. And so that was kind of the idea behind that. And so we have targets basically into everything but these units here, and then these bloat drones here, except for we do have this Bright Lance that can see this bloat drone. So let's take a look at what happened at the end of the shooting phase. Oh, a lot just disappeared. Poxwalkers are gone. Plagueburst Crawler is gone. Deathshroud Terminator is gone. Deathshroud Terminator is gone. So the Eldrad and Warlocks were able to, fusion guns, able to take them out. The Warlocks were able to take them out, along with the Farseer, I think, shot into them as well. And the Fire Dragons and Fuegan, and I think maybe the Bright Lance took out the Plagueburst Crawler, no problem. And the Warwalker, of course, helped shoot, I think, the Terminators. They were set up to basically, or he was set up to basically either shoot the Terminators, I think is what he did, to try to make sure these Warlocks were getting good value. And we wanted to make sure that the opponent wasn't getting any saves on the Poxwalkers, so we did the Fade and Escape up there. So we really needed that extra AP from the Warwalkers to help us into those Terminators. And so that was kind of the combo there. And it's really nice, again, having this Warwalker has been super useful because now I can give Fade and Escapable to these Hawks to make sure the Poxwalkers don't get their 6-up saves, but I can still allow my Warlocks to be doing good damage even into targets that have 2-up saves. And so the Warwalker is actually becoming something that I think I'm going to continue to keep in my list. Just have one. It's just a nice tech piece, and it's just so good into things that have 2-up saves. And basically the Warwalker is always going to get the best value when you hit something that has 2-up saves and boost the rest of your army into that target. That is absolutely its specialty, should be its focus. Make sure when you're using the Warwalker, you're not throwing him out to die. I think a lot of the people that don't like the Warwalker probably get him in more trouble than he needs to be in, or use him in ways that don't get his value. Like in the beginning of the game, if I'd have moved him forward and scouted him forward, moved him up here maybe to get a line of sight, and I shoot a Bright Lance and a missile launcher into a vehicle, or maybe even 2 Bright Lances if I was going to be aggressive with them, and I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do Bright Lances. This is absolutely not going to get you value by doing a play like that, or just trying to use him by himself. He's really not going to do much, but he absolutely changes the game for your army when he shoots things like the Terminators here, and he shoots things like the Plagueburst Crawler. It really turns on a lot of our units and allows them to do damage into things that they would struggle with normally. So the shooting phase went pretty much to plan. We took out a lot more, and we are on a couple objectives, but we've cleared out our opponent's home objective, and so we're making it really tough for him because we're just not allowing him to score primary. And so even though Eldar in general can have difficulty scoring primary themselves, we're really good at making it hard for our opponent to score primary by making these aggressive plays at the right time and with the right units. So we charge the Scorpions into the Blight Hauler, and then we fight, and Janezar actually kills the Blight Hauler, and the Striking Scorpions, nothing happens up there basically. I think we might have done 1 wound, but the Blight Hauler is still alive, and he didn't kill any of the Scorpions. And so that was the end of the fight phase, but it was actually kind of awesome because now Janezar is still alive because of the help of the Hawks. So again, looking at the score, we scored our 8 points because we had held our home objective, which is stickied, and we also held our expansion, which we haven't been taken off of yet this game, which is great. And then we scored overwhelming force and no prisoners, 5 each, because we got rid of assassination. And so we basically were able to continue to gain more and more of a lead on our opponent. So we overwatch again. Our opponent moves forward, and the Mephitic Blight Hauler had gone this way because our opponent had drawn Bring It Down, and so had to take out the Warwalker. And so the Mephitic Blight Hauler went up to try to take shots at the Blight Hauler, but we overwatched with our Warlocks and our Bright Lance, and we were actually able to take out the Blight Hauler, unfortunately for our opponent. Our opponent also got behind enemy lines, which was not something he was going to be able to do. And so it was kind of a rough set of cards for the opponent, but this was what happened in Overwatch, so we'll go ahead and finish his movement. So the opponent positioned the Blight Launcher to be able to take shots, and this drone here ready to go into Janezar. And then his units back here, he had to move his Lord back onto the objective to hold it. The Hauler couldn't really do anything, was going to be able to just shoot and fight the Scorpions, and so might be able to kill them because he doesn't have the blast weapon necessarily, and so he can actually shoot and then fight in combat as well, try to finish off the Scorpions, knowing that it's unlikely the Scorpions are going to be able to actually finish off that Hauler because they just really don't do well in melee against things like that, but they're doing a good job of just tying them up for now. And so my opponent is able to shoot with the Blight Launcher into the Warwalker with just 1 shot, and it killed him. So my opponent was able to score Bring It Down because the Blight Launcher actually is very powerful. I don't know if you look at the stats on it, but it's actually a very good all-around weapon. And again, one of the reasons I think Death Guard is just in such a good spot right now because they have units like this Blight Launcher that only cost 100 points, and it's 9 toughness, 10 wounds, decent movement, has an invuln save, 3 up, 5 up, and just an all-around amazing unit, especially for 100 points. And then the bloat drones are only 90, and the Blight Haulers are only 90, so they just have an extremely efficient set of units that are pretty tough to kill for their points and do pretty good damage for their points. And so it's pretty apparent why Death Guard is just in such a good place, because the attachment's good, the Terminators are amazing, and they just have very efficient units that are tough to kill. But as you can see, we've been able to absolutely pick them apart. And by focusing the correct type of unit, the Hawks, Bright Lance, and the Farseer Squad, Fuegan, by focusing these units into the targets they want to go into and making sure we're screening things out and being careful so that we only allow the opponent to attack on our terms, the units that we want to keep safe, you can see how we've actually been able to just dismantle his units piece by piece. And that's how you got to focus on dealing with these units. I mean, even with all the indirect, we took out 2 of his indirect pieces pretty early, and then we took out the 3rd later on. And so you got to stay, again, focused on what your units can do, making good plays, and try to score the best you can, stop your opponent from scoring, and stay with the fundamentals. So even though the opponent has indirect, stay focused on fundamentals, and that'll help you with the game. Don't let it rattle you. Don't let it shake you up. Just know that, oh, I'm going to get shot, and some units are going to get taken off the board, and that's okay. That's just what my opponent paid for. They put a bunch of points into indirect, and that's what they're paying for, is to lift some of our models, and that's okay. We just got to stay focused on what we can do, which is come in with concentrated firepower and own specific parts of the board and take them over quickly with the speed that we have in our units, and be able to support units in different ways from across the map. Like the Hawks coming in to support Janezar was huge, and being able to also attack in this spot, having our Farseer Guardian Squad and Fuegan just absolutely control the top of the map, And then being somewhat defensive here, but making a play for this objective to not let our opponent score it for at least one turn was another big play. And so even though we didn't control this side of the board down here with Jane Czar, we didn't control it and just like own it. We were able to disrupt it, but we were able to control and own the top side of the board. And so I think a lot of times one mistake that a lot of Aeldari players make is they don't focus on one part of the board early. By focusing on the top part of the board early, we were able to dominate it and help keep more of our units safe. It made it harder for him to get lines of sight and made it harder for him to get into the units that he wanted to shoot. And it allowed us to keep more of our resources safe, which is a big problem for our opponents. And we were willing to trade the units that we sent down here for the disruption, but we still had enough backing up this line here, basically holding the line between Lycus and Spiders, and Eldrad and the Storm Guardians are not an easy target to deal with. And so we were still holding, but we really focused our firepower up here. And then after that, once we had a safe position to basically stage from, we started then being able to pick our opponent apart in different places of the map, especially with the Hawks. That's kind of their specialty, coming down to different places and picking our opponent apart with mortal wounds and a bunch of shooting. And it's a really great way to deal with armies like this that are slow. We're so much faster. Use the speed that you have to take advantage of the slower speed of our opponents. So the opponent charges, finally takes out Jane Czar, and she ends up dying. And the opponent ends up scoring, bring it down because he took out a Warwalker, but couldn't get anything behind enemy lines. And so his score is continuing to go down, fall behind. He got his challenger card and scored 2 points with this one. And it's not going to make enough of a difference though, because he still only scored 3 on primary because we had shot everything off this objective. And so again, we had our opponent score 3 and 3 on primary, which is an amazing thing to do against Death Guard because they're usually pretty strong in the primary game. So the game's coming down to a close, and we go ahead and move up, sticky this objective, move Eldrad up to be able to get some attacks in here, get the Warlocks, move Eldrad up to get attacks, move the Warlocks up to be able to shoot, get the Bright Lance with an angle here, and get the Farseer out to +1 to hit, Fire Dragon's Fuegan, making sure we're taking out either of these things, and the Striking Scorpion is going to do recover assets, our Warlock Skyrunner is going to do recover assets. Baharoth ended up not having anything to attack, and we were able to actually tow onto this objective, and so they're just going to do recover assets because these units died from all this firepower. And then Lycus and the Warp Spiders are going to jump onto this point to try to take it away from the opponent and shoot and charge and fight this Bloat Drone with a Blight Launcher and finish that off. So in our shooting phase, we again take out pretty much everything and actually ended up taking out that Bloat Drone just with shooting with the Lycus and Warp Spiders actually, which was kind of a surprise. And I can't remember, the Bright Lance actually may have helped them. I think it may have had line of sight, but either way, in shooting, it's gone. So all my opponent has left is this Bloat Drone. And so pretty much everything's taken out. We easily score our secondaries as well. So we scored 3 on behind enemy lines because of Baharoth, and we scored 5 on recover assets because of Baharoth, the Striking Scorpion, and the Warlock Skyrunner. Opponent moves to attack Lycus and the Warp Spiders. Actually had a great draw and ended up with Storm Hostile objectives and no prisoners. Was going to try to kill the Warp Spiders to score no prisoners, and then was able to do enough damage to have enough OC to actually take this point and score Storm Hostile objective. Unfortunately for him, he actually didn't kill the Exarch, and so he was not able to score no prisoners, and that basically was the end of the game. So the opponent was able to score 22 points in secondaries and only 14 in primary. We actually did not allow him to score any primary in turn 5, only 3 in turn 4, 3 in turn 3, and his natural basically 8 for turn 2. So we really limited what our opponent was able to score. He scored another point from the Challenger card, and so ended up with, I believe it was 49 points. At the end of the game, we're able to do engage on all fronts, storm hostile objectives for 4 more points and 4 more points. So we actually maxed out our secondary. And of course, we got 15 for the last round. And that put us at 39 out of 50 for primary, 40 out of 40 for secondary, maxing that out. And so we ended up with an 89 to 49 victory against the Death Guard. And you can kind of see here what we did at the end just to make sure we absolutely wrecked that last vehicle and just scored our secondaries. And so that was the end of the game. So some final thoughts. Don't let indirect rattle you. Be patient and stay focused on what you can do. Don't worry about the fact that your opponent can shoot you with indirect. Be willing to be patient, because the indirect fire is usually not that bad. It seems worse than it is when you actually look at the points value, what's happening. It's usually not too bad. Most things have to shoot for at least 3-4 rounds before they get their value when they're shooting indirect. And that's by design. And so don't let it frazzle you. Make sure you're making good plays, smart decisions with your units, and that's the best thing to do when you're dealing with indirect. Don't be afraid also to put some things in reserves when you're dealing with indirect, because there's no reason to allow your opponent just to have free reign of basically shooting any of your units. Every hawk that they kill in Baharoth's unit is another dice for a mortal wound that you're losing. So we really got to keep these things safe. Every fire dragon that dies is a big chunk of damage against vehicles. So make sure we're being careful with our units that we need. Feel free to put them in reserves. That's what it's for. And then stay focused on your secondaries and just proper play. And that will be the best thing you can do even when your opponent has indirect. The second thing is to screen the battlefield generally through round 3 against major deep strike threats. So this was something that we did generally pretty well. I made one mistake where he was able to come in from deep strike and charge Lycus, because I didn't keep them an inch off the wall. That would have made the charge a lot harder. He still could have made it, but I don't think with the dice he rolled, he actually would have without a reroll. But make sure we're screening the battle generally through round 3, because that's where we become extremely strong, because now with Unshrouded Truth, we can activate our entire army and do it so fast. So if Eldrad and the Storm Guardians have been sitting back on the home objective, not doing as much, sometimes Eldrad can't move forward and cast Doom. There's all sorts of things that might happen, and sometimes he has to stay back there because we can't let our opponent just deep strike onto our home objective, especially in something like Linchpin. So make sure we are screening that out really well through round 3, and then as soon as round 3 is over, we don't have to worry about deep strikes anymore, generally speaking. We can go and attack our opponent full force and become even more aggressive. And the third thing is prioritize your units. This is something that you should be doing at the beginning of the games, thinking about your units and what they are capable of doing. And again, just to recall as examples, we had Fuegan the Fire Dragons. They are going to be good against 90% of that army. Very important. Swooping Hawks with Baharoth. Their mortal wounds could be pivotal. The lethal hits are going to help against that high toughness. The Warwalker is going to help them. So it's somewhat of an important unit. Not as important, but something to consider. And again, prioritize. We're not going to expose our Warwalker unless he is actively shooting something to help either our Hawks or our Guardian squads. That should be your rule of thumb if you take a Warwalker. Don't expose him and shoot with him unless he is actively helping another unit. And that will help you keep him alive, and that will help him do the job he's actually there to do. Then we had Lycus and the Spiders. Their job was to come down and pressure our opponent's objective, and then also possibly go in and assassinate either the character or deal with one of the small vehicles. And so they ended up getting tied up because of a mistake I made, but we prioritized them, kept them off the board early so the indirect could not target them, because we wanted to keep that Exarch with blades alive as long as possible. And we also have to deal with the mortal wounds when we flicker jump. So the less that we allow our Warp Spiders to get hurt before they even flicker jump, the better. Because that's the last thing we want, is to lose a couple spiders and then lose another 1 or 2 to flicker jump, and all of a sudden you don't have much of a unit left. So prioritize those units. Also, in the same vein of that, when I say prioritize your units, also consider what they can do. So the turn that we moved the warp spiders onto our opponent's objective, part of that decision-making process was the fact that those warp spiders, again, were not going to be able to really kill anything else. Their combat effectiveness was basically 0 against all of their targets besides those poxwalkers. So if we can, again, do multiple things at the same time, get their max value by shooting the target they're best at shooting that my opponent has, and steal an objective away from the opponent, and screen. They're doing all those things at the same time, and it's because I prioritize them in a sense, or at least sanction them specifically to deal with one of the poxwalker groups. And I knew that that generally was probably going to be what they were going to do, is go onto a point and take it, but hopefully go onto my opponent's point with poxwalkers and rip them to pieces and take it. Because I knew my opponent was probably going to want their OC to be part of him holding that objective, and the warp spiders could rip that out. And so think about these things before the game so that you are looking for it during the game. And that will help you see those opportunities to do a big play like we did in turn 2. All right, well, that is the end of the battle report and my final thoughts. I really hope that this was helpful and beneficial for you. I was really excited to do this battle report, and I was also honestly a little nervous. I know Death Guard has been a big problem for a lot of people, and they are very strong right now. Definitely one of the top tier factions in the game. And so I knew this was going to be a tough fight, and that I would have to play it really well. And I feel like most of the decisions and moves that I did were the right ones. I'm sure there's different ways to play it, and that's the thing. I'm not telling you that you have to play it exactly like I did. That's not the purpose of these battle reports. The purpose of the battle reports is really just to give you some ideas of how I'm processing through, and at least give you my perspective, because there's different styles of play. Not everybody would have been aggressive when I went aggressive. Some people may have waited another turn, and it would probably have been okay too, because that's just their play style. They wait a little longer and try to get a little more value to the units before they go full aggressive. And so I'm not trying to convince you to just play my way, but I do want to at least give you some ideas of how to deal with some of these difficult factions like Death Guard, how to deal with their armor, deal with the deep striking Terminators. You can kind of go back through the battle report and see how I was constantly screening out those Death Shroud Terminators to make sure that they weren't a problem throughout the game. And just these kind of things that as you play and you start focusing on these little details, this is what helps you score bit by bit and just take the opponent apart piece by piece until you now have a substantial lead. If this was something that you felt like really helped you, I would greatly appreciate any kind of feedback, again, on the way it was presented. I'd also greatly appreciate if you would share, subscribe, and like the video. It just helps more people see it, and that is a great thing, of course, for YouTube. Everybody knows this, and I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing it. But I was just looking at the analytics, and we are sitting close to 50% of the people that are watching it are not subscribers. And so it'd be great if you would be willing to subscribe. And I promise you that I will do my best to make videos that bring value and will hopefully help people that watch them become better Aeldari players. And that is what my focus is going to be. So I would greatly appreciate every kind of bit of support that you can do. And if you want to support even more, we do have the Patreon set up, and feel free to check out the Patreon and let me know if you would like to look into our coaching. The coaching has started taking off a bit more, and that's been absolutely great. The students have been great, and I've been enjoying working with people who are beginners, intermediates, and even advanced players. And so regardless of where you are in your journey, if you want some help learning Aeldari and understanding how to play, especially Seer Council is of course my specialty right now, but I do have experience in the other detachments, feel free to give me an email, and I would love to help you become a better player and do the best that I can to help you reach your goals. So just let me know, and again, I hope that you guys found this video helpful. We'll see you in the next one.